Good morning. I'm not used to being able to talk without holding this. Just going to get set up here for a moment. Well, good morning, Oneness, and good morning to all our streaming viewers and those who may be watching later. I'm Reverend Jenna Wexler, and I have a focus ministry that focuses on sacred activism. For those of you who know me, you know it is a passion and it is my work in the world. And I want to start by saying that I've been set up. Yeah. But I'm glad I've been set up. It's been right and perfect. Brian set me up with his talk last week. The opening song is sort of my theme song for my ministry. That was a fabulous, and I didn't choose it. So Spirit's been helping me along here. I like this type of setup. So last week, Brian introduced and shared really rich nuggets from Ernest Holmes' Sermon by the Sea, and that is an iconic address. It was his last before he transitioned off the earth. And when you read it, by the way, it's in the August Science of Mind magazine. If you don't have that, I'm sure there may be still some copies there, or you can Google it online. There are a series of statements where he says, "Show me." And the first one is, "Show me someone who is for something and against nothing." That is such a powerful statement. That in itself, I think, is one of the key tenets of Science of Mind, that we are for something and against nothing. And when we talk about affirmative prayer, I don't want to bump into it. When we talk about affirmative prayer, what are we doing? We are making declarations of what we are for, what we are affirming. We're not praying about what we're against. We don't go there. We don't talk about those conditions in prayer. We up-level it to what we are for. And Brian also mentioned that Sermon by the Sea is a statement of Ernest Holmes' legacy and vision for all of us and for this teaching. And I could feel it because I love that series of statements from Sermon by the Sea. And I could tell by the responses I heard through the streaming that many of you did as well. By the end, you were inspired. Who wouldn't be inspired by a world of oneness and love and peace, and that it's ours to bring it about? But I want to suggest that it's wonderful to have that aspiration, to feel it in our heart and be so inspired by it. But then it's another thing to go out and walk it. It's another thing to go out and day by day by day, choice by choice, bring it about, make it happen. So I'm going to borrow on this theme from Sermon by the Sea of let's be for something against nothing, but what are we called to do to make that happen? So, for example, anybody who's been in a long-term committed relationship, and I'm not talking about the type that you were born into in your family. You know, somebody new who came into your life, and this great love, this great inspiration was part of the scene, and how energized you were and elated about it. But then over time, as that relationship deepens and becomes more committed, how many times have we heard people say, "Gee, marriage is a lot of work," right? Because we start with that inspiration. But then sometimes that inspiration isn't there with the same intensity, the same throttle, the same juice in every moment. And that's when we need something else to carry us through. So let's talk about that today. Let's talk about what keeps that inspiration and love going. How do we keep it alive? And how do we keep it not only alive within, but active through us in the world? Now, in the early 2000s, I was very inspired to do peace work. And I was really excited about it, and I did some with some fellow Science of Mind people down in the DC area in different ways. But then I started realizing, you know, peace is this wonderful principle, this wonderful concept, but it really doesn't have definition. We love it, we aspire to it, but how do we go about doing it? And we have to remember that not only are we called to faith, but we are called to action, the works of our faith in the world. Excuse me. So the first thing we have to do is embrace the concept. Now this concept of for something and against nothing sounds wonderful, but now let's go live it. And we find ourselves very often bumping up. If we're tuned into ourselves, if we're in our witness mode, it's like, oh geez, what am I for here? I can be very vocal about what I'm against. And how many times, you know, are we asked, well, what do you want? What is it you want, right? And we pause and we think, well, I don't want this, and I don't want this, right? It's what we're against. Very clear about what we're against. And when we listen to the news or pay attention to what's going on in the world, we like to, you know, a lot of what's out there is what's being presented to us that we have an against sort of reaction to, right? So how do we switch that up and be for something in the face of everything that's triggering us, that's causing us to have that reaction against? Well, one thing is we have to embrace the idea that it's possible. I can be for something and against nothing. And one of the ways we do that is through affirmations, and we're going to touch into that later. And we allow it. So we have to embrace the idea first, and then we have to allow it and say, yeah, I'm going to make a spot here where this is welcome within me. And I may be bumping up against stuff that seems to be not in alignment with this, but each one of them is showing me where I'm being called forth and invited to make a shift in my life, right? So instead of getting down on ourselves, let's just say, whoa, well, there's another one. Okay, I see it. Look what I'm seeing about myself. And each one of them, then we can make that little pivot and say, okay, how do I be for something instead? And we make that commitment. We make the commitment to stay with it, to keep practicing this, and to keep going with it. And not only do we allow it and commit to it, but we go deeper in our faith. We embrace that. And part of that is, how deep is our faith? To what extent do we feel like we can really lean in, that when we take a step, that we're supported? Now, do we think that, I'm going to make a statement here that we've often used in the past in this teaching, in God there is no big or small. That God is bigger than the storm that we're facing in our life. How deeply do we have that embodied within us as a go-to? And so we're called also to deepen our faith through practice and commitment all the time. That we believe that as we change our beliefs, that we also change our experience. And so part of being for something and against nothing is changing into what, right? And then we are called to action. Because if we believe something and we're for something, then we are called to be in action in support of it. We are called to be, first of all, to recognize that that inspiration is God's inspiration through us. And so when we deny it, when we say, oh, that's not mine to do, oh, I don't want to do that, really what we're doing is we're negating that divine inspiration that has tapped us. And that is a form of resistance. So let's look at that. When we're for something and against nothing. Against something is a resistance, right? And we are great at resisting. We're sort of just, you know, beings that do that. And I think we're enculturated that way as well. So What happens when we're in resistance is we're locked into some idea, some energy, some belief from the past. And we are held there, and we're repeating it over and over because we're not willing to change up and do something else. And it's interesting also when we look at Sermon by the Sea, his first statement is, show me someone who is for something and against nothing. And the very next statement is, show me someone who is without fear. Because resistance is based in fear. Am I good enough? Do I have the time for this? What is this going to ask of me? What if I really don't like this? What if I'm not in, there's so many forms of resistance. And I'm going to suggest too, as a spiritual practice in coming weeks, is to just tune in witness mode to your forms of resistance, because there's a lot of sneaky faces of resistance out there. And there's some spiritual faces of resistance out there. We call them spiritual bypass. And they also look like ignoring something. Like, I don't want to do that. That's not spiritual. That's out in the world, or that's political, or that's something else. But the thing is, if God is inspiring us, then we are called to be tuning in and being in support. If we believe in the oneness of all life, then all that's going on in the world is part of that oneness of all life. And when we resist, what are we doing? We're disconnecting. We're separating out of that oneness. And so to be in oneness and acting in the world in oneness means staying in that commitment of wholeness, of living in a holy, holy way, in the wholeness of being, in that oneness, and what is ours to do. Now, for each of us, what is ours to do varies in size and varies in interest and varies in skill. That's the beauty of diversity, because each of us individually, we don't have the bandwidth to do it all. And that's why community is so important. And that's why spiritual practice together is so important. Because not only does it amp up like a quantum leap in the energy of that spiritual practice, but it also together is what makes it possible to do something beyond what we individually can do. I want to read from Science of Mind magazine, September 5th, just a few days ago. And this is a quote of Shellis Glendinning. She says, if we cannot envision the world we would like to live in, we cannot work towards its creation. If we cannot place ourselves in it, in our imagination, we cannot begin to believe it's possible. So going back, we have to believe it's possible against all doubts, against all the earmarks of what looks like what's going on out there. That who am I to make a dent in the world is another form of resistance. Even if it's just a prayer, that is taking a step and doing something. Envisioning is power. Now, Reverend Brian mentioned last week that Sermon by the Sea is the legacy on which we build our vision for the future. And in January, the Power Talks, the Sacred Activism Power Talks, I talked about the power of vision. And we looked at Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision, and we looked at JFK's vision, which became our country's rallying call to put a man on the moon within 9 years. And we did it, because when we have a power vision that pulls us together for something, it's amazing what happens. Now, what happens today may be small. Don't let that deter us, because it's the accumulation, the constancy that builds up and helps it to come about. So when we look at faith, where is it that we falter? Again, let's not think about what's impossible, because that's questioning God's ability. If God is infinite and eternal, absolute wisdom, infinite possibility, absolute power, in our place of faith, then let's lean in on that. And let's get big on what we're asking and what we're willing to do. So we are really being called to unceasingly live in our faith, live in the vision of what we are for, and then doing it. You know, getting in alignment with what's ours to do individually and then doing it. You know, Ernest Holmes says there's a power for good that we can use for definite purpose. And he also said that we must manifest. So in the body of this teaching, as a foundation, he is calling us into action. Not to just be in the ivory tower, the mystic in faith, but also into action in the world. Another quote, this one from the August Science of Mind magazine, August 9th, and this is Ernest Holmes. He says, "Seek to make your work a prayer, your believing an act, your living an art. It is then that the object of your faith shall be made visible." He lays it right out there. We go to spiritual practice believing. We believe, we act according to our beliefs, and we make that into an art, the way we live it forward. So when we look out in the world, I want to ask you this. What are your visions? What do you vision the future for our world to be? Just go within for a minute and ponder that. Not the media's vision, not the fear-mongering vision, not all the apocalyptic movie visions of the future. What is your vision of the future of the world? Do you have one? And those visions for the future, are they for something, or is there an against component there? How often do you visit that vision? And if you don't have one, then I encourage you to start growing one. Start developing your vision for the future, for the world. Centers for Spiritual Living, we say we have this vision of a world that works for everyone. What does that look like in your heart, in your imagination, in your excitement? Now, it's easy to envision the end result as a big, overarching result. But give it some detail. What does it look like? And keep doing that. There was a period of time where I was part of an organization, a founding member of an organization, and administratively, operationally, we cooked. We really had it together. But we didn't have a constant vision that we held. And when that wobbles, when that's not held constant, that's when we go off track. And we know, we've heard it time and time again, that concept that without vision, the house falls, right? Vision is that orienting, it's like the navigational map for us. So when we think about what's going on in the world, how many times do we engage and think, geez, we are so divided, there is so much hate out there, and it's getting worse. It's getting ratcheted up day by day. And we can see that it gets used as a tool. And where do we go next? What do we do next? How do we heal and bring back to oneness a divided nation where there is so much hate? Who's ready to take that on, starting today? Do you have a roadmap of what to do that? Do you have the skill set of what to do that? Yeah, I'm seeing that. I'm seeing the faces like, oh my God, no, no, I don't want, I know it needs to be done, but not me, right? So one of the things, and we've been talking about othering, and so one of the things that needs to happen for us to reunite is somehow we have to come back together. And how do we do that? Well, first of all, we start there in principle that we are all one and we are all part of each other. Okay? Again, that's like peace, that's a beautiful concept and we really believe in it, but now how do we act on it? When we step into a situation where we might be talking to somebody we perceive as one of those scary others, and we may need to talk to them, are we ready to do that? Do we feel comfortable doing that? Are you ready to go there? Is that something you're for, or do you feel against? And the same thing with hate. How do we address hate? What do we do about all the hate out there? Well, clearly one of the things we do is we work within our beliefs, our spirituality, our spiritual practice, but then we might be bumping up against it as something we experience or that we witness in the world. So I'd like to share with you some things going on within the Sacred Activism ministry. And starting next week, there's going to be details on the literature table in the back. And that is, we're taking on talking with each other, talking across the divide. And we're also, the way we're going to be approaching both of these subjects is that there are some workshops that we are rolling out this fall. Now, one of them is about talking across the divide. And this is designed to learn how, we're going to start simple here, with the basic skills of speaking and listening in honoring and respectful ways. To say, whoa, you may feel like one of those people to me, but you're a real person. And somehow I know we have some commonality. And even though we're seeing things differently, how can I step out of going right away to trying to convince you, going right away to being triggered? How do I step out of that and say, whoa, I'm just really curious. How what's important to you, how you see things, and then listen, be in that pause mode and just really listen. These are skills that are fundamental, but, I've been through this workshop, and even though I thought I would be cool about it, I'm realizing where I was, bumping up against it. And so it's something that is fundamental that can help each and every one of us be that divine ambassador out in the world that can help to start being that bridge across the divide and building those alliances where there wasn't one before. The other thing is, I've been collaborating with Robin Brown, therapist, and this is groundbreaking work that we're doing here, especially within this teaching. It's a part one, part two pair of workshops, and we call them Talking About Hate and Love. Just putting it straight out there. Let's talk about hate and love. And from the standpoint of what is hate? Where does it come from? How does it play within us? What's the physiology of it? And then spiritually, what do we do about it? So we're gearing some work that we can all engage in that helps us be present in the world and for something, have the skills to be for it in the public world and against nothing. I'd like to close with that quote by Ernest Holmes. Seek to make your work a prayer, your believing an act, your living an art. It is then that the object, and I'm going to say of our faith, shall be made visible to us. Please join me in this affirmative prayer. We are forever one with that one power, one presence, one life that is the source and creator of all that is everywhere present in every moment, in every situation. And by being everywhere present, we know that we can call on it, invoke it, that there is this power for good that we call God that we can use for definite purpose. And we know that definite purpose is that divine calling to live in a holy, holy way, to be that presence that is that holy, holy way and helps to foster it through each of us in the world. And so we lay down our fear, we release our resistance, we courageously and boldly step forward in what we are for. That magnificent future of a world that works for everyone, empowered in our hearts, inspired by this and for this, and saying, yes, okay, I release my fear and I allow myself to embrace this and commit to being a part of bringing this forward. And so I relinquish my fear, I release that, knowing that as God in action, through my spiritual practice and through my commitment and belief, I am for all that is good and all that supports goodness in the world. And how good that feels. The shackles are gone. The holding back is over. I am straight out for goodness. And every day I am committed to being the highest I can in that regard, learning every step of the way and knowing I am always supported. And so together, we breathe this in. We deeply accept. We embody this in heart, mind, and deed. For this is what we are here to do. Born of love, created by love, serving for love, and for a world that works for everyone. We allow this to be our truth. We allow this to be who we are in action, and feeling blessed, supported, and whole. Together we commit to this, allowing it so, and so it is.